Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning. Hello, Adefemi. How is London?
Good morning.
In Nigeria yesterday, in London
good morning, Dr. Rubin.
Good morning.
Exactly. It just feels like just yesterday I was with you all in Lagos, and now almost seemingly as quick as I can click my fingers, I find myself here in London. Good morning to you all. It's so good to hear your voices. Let's start with our World Brief, and we'll start now. Yes, we will start now with what we're seeing coming out of the United States. Kamala Harris has, of course, now named her running mate. She has picked Governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, as her running mate. She formally revealed him in their first appearance together at a rally in Philadelphia just yesterday, and they were definitely received well. The crowd there, which according to the Harris campaign has been their largest crowd to date, definitely welcomed the two of them. Both of their speeches were constantly being interrupted by cheers and applause. Kamala Harris saying that Tim Walz is going to be the vice president America deserves. Just a bit of background on him, we did speak about him extensively just yesterday when we were still speculating on who Kamala Harris would choose. But now that she's chosen Tim Walz, it's good to know that he is himself a former veteran, also a career educator, a career teacher, someone who has definitely championed social policy, making sure that the people of Minnesota are covered and protected as it pertains to social policies and social welfare, free school meals for children in schools. But also, he has definitely championed the need for women's rights too. Minnesota being the first state to emerge as being able to still provide abortion controls in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade being repealed. So he's definitely a very popular candidate, a safe option for Kamala Harris, especially when you put him against the likes of Josh Shapiro, who is definitely younger, very popular, but perhaps his views on the Middle East and Israel perhaps made him a bit more of a dangerous choice. So with the choosing of Tim Walz, it does seem as though there's going to be a level of stability now as we set our sights towards the Democratic National Convention, which will be taking place in Chicago in the coming days. So that's what we're seeing in the United States. Now, if we just sidestep over to Bangladesh, and the latest that we're hearing is that Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus has been named interim leader of Bangladesh. This is something that definitely a lot of the student protesters in the country have welcomed, because in the aftermath of Sheikh Hasina's abrupt exit from Bangladesh, reportedly to India, it left a vacuum, a political vacuum at the helm of governance in Bangladesh. One that there were some fears that perhaps the military, which already enjoys quite a powerful presence in the country, was going to fill with an army general. But now we're hearing that you've got Muhammad Yunus stepping in as interim leader. He has been released from incarceration. He was formerly in prison. He's actually still on bail on charges that he says were politically motivated. And it does seem as though with this decision, it will calm tensions, definitely with the student population. The vast majority of them seem to be happy that they are moving away from the prospects of a military leadership in the country and still staying within a civilian rule. So we're hoping to see, and it will be interesting to see whether or not this will bring down the temperature that we've been seeing quite raised high in Bangladesh since these protests started in July. And then lastly, here we are in London, and you've got Prime Minister Keir Starmer come out and say in very certain terms what he's going to do to tackle this issue of race rights in the United Kingdom. Let's take a listen to what he had to say first and foremost.
I'm now expecting substantive sentencing before the end of this week. That should send a very powerful message to anybody involved, either directly or online, that you are likely to be dealt with within a week, and that nobody should be involving themselves in this disorder.
Definitely, and that disorder you see has continued. There have been reports that just today alone, 20 to 40 more protests are going to be expected across the United Kingdom. So again, with the very strong position that Keir Starmer has taken, it's definitely one that it isn't really translating into a calming of tensions or the stoppage of these protests, because as I said, more are scheduled for today. That being said, if we take, I know I will come back to you all in the studio for comments, but I just want to take some newspaper papers here in the United Kingdom that are referencing this riot issue that we're seeing in the United Kingdom. So firstly, if we take a look at The Sun is first looking at the fact that, again, 40 more protests are going to be held today across the United Kingdom. And the headline on The Sun reads, anti-social media. It's blaming social media for the spreading of misinformation, which started this entire issue, stokes already existing racist and anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim sentiments in the United Kingdom. And that's what we're seeing culminate in all of these protests. And then also, staying in the United Kingdom papers, the Daily Express has Nigel Farage, leader of Reform UK, and he's talking about, firstly, condemning these riots that we're seeing, but also he says that Keir Starmer should take this current situation and use it as a vehicle to focus on anti-immigration sentiment. To Nigel Farage, what we're seeing here is more than just people being violent. There is according to him, a legitimate desire for the UK government to put an end to mass immigration, and perhaps that will again calm down the tensions and the temperatures that we're seeing happening in the United Kingdom. So those are our international stories just yet. I'll come back to you for comment, and then we'll look at the rest of Africa and of course Nigeria. What do you have to say about what we're seeing with Kamala Harris, Bangladesh, and of course the riots here in the United Kingdom?
Okay, I mean, very good one for Kamala Harris there. Tim Walz is deemed as a moderate, and I'm sure that's what she looked for. Because you see, a lot of the accusation on the part of Republicans is that she's too liberal. So you don't also want somebody that strays on the very, very left side of the Democratic Party. So he's a balancer. He believes in social welfare, like you talked about, food and everything, free food for school students in Minnesota and the likes. But also he's got a very powerful message as regards women's rights. Yesterday in a speech, which was fire yesterday, he talked about his own battle with IVF, that he and his wife did IVF for a lot of times. Finally, they had a child called Hope. And in fact, that's why they named their child Hope yesterday. So that also resonated with a lot of people. He's ready to debate J.D. Vance like yesterday. He's a good debater. He's a good speaker. He's a teacher. American they have this affectation with people that served in the military. He served in the National Guard. He's come from a family of teachers. He's married to a teacher and all of that. And his speech was really good yesterday. I think that's going to rally in a lot of money. As regards Mohammed Yunus, the founder of the Grameen Bank, this was much expected because at a time of a national conflict in Bangladesh, you need a balancer. Yunus too had been taken to jail, just like the former leader of Bangladesh before Sheikh Hasina, that's Zia too. She'd been taken to jail, because of all the wranglings in politics. But now they've been released. The task before Yunus will be how to stabilize the country and how to lead them up to elections. He has to do that with a lot of fairness. He's a man that's widely popular, based on the work he did for poor people in Bangladesh with the Grameen Bank. So we can only say break a leg and do it fast.
All right, yes, he's currently in Paris and he's hoping to return to Bangladesh to take on the responsibility. As he said, it's such an honor for students to consider him a worthy advisor to the interim government at the point. I think what's key for me there is that not just is it that the student protesters saw what they wanted happen in terms of Sheikh Hasina leave office, but also that the person they wanted, because we had this conversation yesterday about a potential or possible military coming in the interim to take over, but the students were insistent that they'd rather have Professor Yunus, Mohammed, and that's quite clear that up until the end, and that's a move away from perhaps Kenya, where yes, President Ruto did what they wanted, but in terms of actually putting in the person their preferred choices, it wasn't quite the same end to end. Then moving on to the US, of course, that's one of the biggest stories internationally as we look forward to November for the elections, 3 months to go, and the Democratic Party are doing what perhaps we haven't seen in a very long time in American elections, close to the time. A VP has now been picked, moving away from what people might have said were popular choices like Josh Shapiro, whom people thought was a front runner. But what had said might have been a disadvantage for him was his stance on Israel. And of course, that had been a dent in the Democratic Party's campaign so far, and they lost some popularity, especially amongst young voters. So maybe this might work in their favor. And then for Mark Kelly, he's a senator representing Arizona. Arizona is a border state, and of course, immigration has come up big in terms of from the Republicans. So of course, that might also have been a factor in that. But just to end by saying that if you notice in that particular, I thought it was quite interesting to see his first address, at least as VP nominee, behind the podium of the VP of America America's official, stance, and just to see one current vice president, perhaps the future vice president, speaking to Americans?
Okay, let me start with Bangladesh. Sheikh Hasina is gone, but it's still a long road ahead for Bangladesh. The issues that will still have to be resolved. The main issue raised by the students against discrimination who started the Gen Z revolution in Bangladesh. And what is that issue? That 30% of public service, civil service jobs are reserved for the relatives of persons who took part in the 1971 independence struggle, which brought independence from Pakistan to Bangladesh. And they are saying that in the face of a very high unemployment rate, that cannot work. That's why, so it's also an issue about discrimination about minorities. Now, Bangladesh did well under Sheikh Hasina, who has now fled to India with her sister, but there is now high inflation, there is unemployment. These are issues that will have to be addressed. Mohammed Yunus is a temporary arrangement. The president has already said that there will be elections very soon. So we have to watch the developments in that country very closely. Unfortunately, there was celebration after Hasina fled, but that celebration even again resulted in violence, with the ancestral home of Sheikh Hasina's father, the first president after independence, being destroyed, set on fire. Awani League offices, also set on fire. The museum also set on fire, but we hope that the situation will be resolved. More persons were killed yesterday after the 300 that have been killed. In the UK, 40 protests in about 40 cities, towns and cities today. Well, the police, they say they are deploying 6,000 policemen to address this situation. Well, Nigel Farage may well be right to say that, Britain is on the brink, even as far as Belfast, where a person was injured and is in critical condition. But to you, Adifemi, who is there, just keep safe. What I find interesting about Britain also is Elon Musk getting involved in the matter. Well, social media has been identified as a major catalyst in the crisis. And Elon Musk calling Kestama two-tier care, predicting civil war in the United Kingdom. Well, I don't know what his business is in the matter. Why doesn't he just mind his social media business, with Britain saying, look, social media has to be more restrained in promoting disinformation. Finally, of course, Harris was sent to the presidential campaign with Wales. Well, I hope it will be a fine Wales at the end of the day. But, Wales is considered a moderate and a progressive, and also a labor champion. He has even been endorsed by the biggest labor union federation in the United States. You can't say he doesn't have experience. He's been a National Guardsman. He's been in Congress for 2 years. He's a two-time governor. So he comes to the job with better credentials than J.D. Vance. But of course, what do you expect the Trump campaign to say? They say he's a dangerously liberal extremist. And they are criticizing him for how he's pro-transgender position and his handling of the protests that erupted after the killing of George Floyd. But what do you expect them to say anyway?
All right, Adefemi, thank you so much for bringing us to World Brief. Yes, we can go to other papers now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ion. Thank you for all of your comments. Let's take a look at what's happening in Ghana. Some new research has come out on the front page of the Daily Graphic. If we look at the front page of the Daily Graphic, you've got the head of the economic growth, the Institute of Statistics, Social Economic Research. They've come out to say that they believe that the economic growth that Ghana is currently receiving or experiencing, or economic growth to date, according to this research, according to this headline based on this research, they say that it favors the rich in the country. And as a result, the think tank behind this research are calling for a greater distribution or even a redistribution of wealth across Ghana. Again, you're going to be seeing a lot more social issues coming out of Ghana as they head towards the polls in December. I think December 7th is going to be the date for its general presidential elections. And as a result, more and more issues as it pertains to jobs, unemployment, social policy are going to be coming out. So this research again looks at the fact that economic growth is favouring just one section of society, and there have been calls for a redistribution of said wealth. Staying on the African continent, let's take a look at the Daily Nation in Kenya, and they are commemorating the 1998 attacks on July 28th, I believe it was. And this article on the front page talks about how Kenya feels as though it was let down by the United States. It said that it did share intelligence with United States authorities when they found out or believed that there was an attack looming. Of course, Al-Qaeda did in fact exercise deadly attacks across the US embassies in Nairobi and of course in Dar as well. And they are commemorating those heinous attacks, those deadly attacks, with the front page of their newspaper. And then if we now step away from Africa as a whole and then hone in specifically on Nigeria, let's take a look at the front page of This Day newspaper. This Day newspaper looks like a multitude of issues, but definitely the big one that jumps out is the fact that the military has come out and says that it will resist any attempt to enforce any type of regime change in the country. The federal government has put sponsors of this attempted or believed plot to move Nigeria or change leadership in Nigeria. He's put the sponsors in the diaspora on a federal government watch list. In addition to that, the accounts of these suspected sponsors, their accounts in Nigeria have now been frozen as well, just as a means of protecting national security in the country as it continues to protect itself at these ongoing hashtag and bad governance protests. So that's what we're seeing. And then also you've got comments from former President Olusegun Obasanjo. He was speaking to the Financial Times. There's a documentary that they've released looking at Nigeria's resource curse, and he talks about how perhaps an over-reliance on fossil fuels has been quite detrimental to Nigeria as a whole. And funnily enough, if we move on to the front page of the New Telegraph, they are also quoting that same documentary from the Financial Times. Again, former President Olusegun Obasanjo is quoted on the front page of the New Telegraph, looking at the fact that he now thinks that, again, with the oil, the reliance that we have on fossil fuels is only fueling a lot of detrimental things that we're seeing in the country. He actually mentions the Dangote refinery, and on the front page of the New Telegraph, he's quoted as saying that fuel importers will continue to sabotage or will sabotage the Dangote refinery as he talks about, again, the negative side of Nigeria's resource wealth and in reference to it being a resource curse in this context. Then if we move on to the front page of The Guardian is looking at FAAC allocations and how it says that citizens are wallowing in misery as governors continue to see duties to the federal government. This is, of course, in terms of revenues coming in, the money's coming in from the federal government that was first going to state governors and then reaching local government thereafter in dribs and drabs. What The Guardian are reporting on the front page is the fact that the revenue profiles of these states reached 5.3 trillion naira in the first year of Tinubu's presidency. And they are asking why that hasn't trickled down to the people in the states. Why hasn't that taken a huge chunk out of the poverty that is facing millions of Nigerians in the country? So it is quite an interesting, quite a scathing report on the state of governance in the country, and says that perhaps if there were more focus on this money trickling down to the people who need them, we wouldn't have the hashtag End Bad Governance protest taking place in Nigeria today. Moving on from The Guardian, let's take a look at The Vanguard. And The Vanguard is looking again at the comments made by Deputy Governor of Lagos State, Obafemi Hamzat, which of course the three of you did a wonderful job on his interview just yesterday. And they are talking about parts of what he discussed on the show, specifically about the Igbo Must Go slogan, how he has completely condemned it, and that the state government in Lagos are putting together plans to alleviate tribalistic sentiments in the state, and hopefully that will have a knock-on effect on the rest of the country. From The Vanguard, let's take a look at The Punch. The Punch is still on this Russian flag debacle about how this was an incident of treason, of how this could be a situation where some small pockets of society, they make reference to less than just 1% of the people protesting, were trying to have ulterior motives, aside from ending bad governance, but perhaps trying to enforce a type of regime change in the country. But again, the military and security agents continue to investigate. In fact, in the Punch, they are talking about how 4 politicians from the north of Nigeria are being investigated over the use of these flags and what involvement potentially they may have had to trying to flame the embers of unconstitutional change in Nigeria. And then let's look at The Nation. The Nation newspaper is looking at the CBN's approval of the merger between Unity Bank and Providence Banks. I am sure Rotis, who is eager, I'm sure, to talk to you about the latest updates in global business, will be talking about that in his segment, but also on the Global Business Report after the morning show this morning. But yes, just an instance of the mergers and acquisitions taking place in Nigeria, the CBN has put its stamp of approval on that merger happening between Providus and Unity Bank. And then lastly, our last Nigerian paper this morning, let's take a look at the front cover of the Daily Trust. And they are, unfortunately, they've pictured the 4 people, some of whom were killed in Kano and in Zaria states over the past coming days. One of them, a bride-to-be, as you can see, all quite young people, people who were killed during the protests, as I said, in Kano and Zaria. Talking about Kano, it has been reported that there has been some calming with the loosening of curfews, perhaps the violence that we were seeing in the very early parts of these protests do appear to have calmed down. That being said, clearly, as we can see, they were deadly, and all of those deaths are heartbreaking. I'm sending it back over to you in the studio in Lagos there. Hopefully there will be time for some comments from you all.
Right.
Otherwise, that is what I have for you today.
All right, thank you so much, Adefemi. We're out of time. Well, you're out of town, and we'll see you again tomorrow for World Brief and, of course, Newspaper Review.